Let's talk about another contradiction in the Bible.
All right, let's check this out. I'm curious about these contradictions. I'm sure you are too.
There are two very different accounts of Judas's death in the New Testament. The shorter and more basic one is found in the book of Acts. Chapter 1, verses 18 and 19 says that Judas had acquired a field with the money that he was paid to betray Jesus. And he was on that field, and says he fell headlong and burst in the middle, and his splanchna, his bowels, gushed out. And knowledge of that event spread around Jerusalem, and so that field became known as Akeldama, the field of blood.
Right, so this incident would have just happened. We know that Jesus had spent about 40 days with his disciples. He ascended. They went back to Jerusalem, and then the Feast of Pentecost came up, which is almost a full 2 months after. So there's a good 40, 50 days plus minus, give or take, that has taken place in here. And so this incident would have been well known. Not all of the apostles remained in Jerusalem after the crucifixion and the resurrection. They went into Galilee. They were fleeing, afraid. Some might have stayed. And so this whole incident with what happened with Judas, with the money, it would be fresh on a lot of people's minds. And there would have been a lot of different testimonies as to what exactly happened. So with the account that is in the book of Acts, it's accurate. This is Peter standing up, emphasizing the fact that we need to replace Judas and his apostleship according to the scriptures. So he's going to lean heavy on the Bible, which Jesus and the apostles leaned heavy on the scriptures when it came to how they were going to conduct their faith, their practice, and their doctrine. So Judas was paid according to the scriptures and fulfillment of the scriptures. Okay, the Bible gave a specific amount of silver that would have been used to betray Jesus. That's in the Old Testament, and that exact amount was given to Judas. There's no disputing that. And what had happened was Judas repented himself. He thought, oh man, this is blood money. I can't use this. Threw it down. We're going to look at Matthew. Matthew explains that aspect of what took place.
Matthew has a very different story. In Matthew 27, starting in verse 3, Judas feels regret for what he did, goes back to the chief priests with the money that they paid him, says, I have betrayed innocent blood. And they said, not our problem, dude. And so he throws the money into the temple, and the text just says he went and hanged himself. And then the chief priests, because the money is blood money that they paid to have Jesus killed, they say it's not lawful to put it in the treasury. We've got to do something with this right now. So they use it to buy the potter's field so that they have a place to bury foreigners. And because that field was purchased with blood money, that field became known as the field of blood. And so we have two very clearly contradictory accounts.
What appears to have happened, okay, because if you're going to investigate these contradictory stories, then you need to try to piece together, as a good investigator, what probably happened by taking the multiple testimonies of what was seen. Obviously, when Judas was found in the field, what they saw, it's clearly evident, was a man who had fallen headlong, landed on some of the rocks or whatever was there, wherever he tried to hang himself. They looked up, they see maybe a broken tree branch with a rope that had snapped. Okay, so he tried to hang himself. So they're thinking, oh man, this guy tried to hang himself. He fell wrong. He landed straight down, headlong, landed straight down, ripped open his guts, and just, what a tragic, awful way to die, okay? But the point is, yeah, he hung himself, but it didn't work out the way he thought it would. That was his intention, to hang himself, but he ended up falling, burst open, and it was a completely gory death, which is crazy that this is the first church service that Peter is leading, and his opening text is, hey, this guy got his bowels gushed out, okay?
Now, an apologist approaching this is going to begin from the premise that if there is any possible way for these two accounts to be reconciled, it is not a contradiction. And
actually, Dan's being dishonest here. That is not how an apologist or anybody who is sincere with understanding what the Bible is all about, that's not how they're going to approach this account. Yeah, there's a contradictory statements here that's going on. They don't match up. But let's get into why that's okay. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels, and Acts as well, do not claim to be revelation from God. What they do claim to be are eyewitness accounts of the companions of Christ or the testimonies of those who were the companions of the apostles, those who were close. They are eyewitness or testimonial accounts of the historic, literal events of Jesus' life. When I say they do not claim to be revelation from God, what I mean by that is what they exactly are. They are a testimony to the revelation of God. Okay, Jesus is the revelation of God. Okay, Hebrews 1 explains to us that in times past, in diverse ways, God spoke to us through his prophets. But in these last days, or these last times, this final age, God has spoken to us through his Son. He will not speak to us in any other way except that which is the revelation of his Son. There are no more prophets that will come. Jesus, the Word incarnate, did not just bring a revelation from God. He is the revelation. He's the fulfillment, he said, of the law and the prophets. He's the source of the law and the prophets. Jesus himself said that you search the scriptures because you think in them you have eternal life by this religious structure that you have fabricated, your traditions, your laws that you've added unto it, and you're going through the scriptures trying to figure out and trying to follow some sort of form that you've created in order to find eternal life. But Jesus said, these are they, the scriptures, which testify of me. And that's what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Acts, and the epistles are all about. They testify of Jesus. So if these are eyewitness accounts or testimonials from eyewitnesses that have been recorded for us and preserved in these books, and we read accounts that differ and seem to contradict, well, any good police detective or investigator is going to do exactly what he has to do when it comes to eyewitness testimony being given. When they often contradict each other, you have to investigate. Are these stories that are being told, these testimonies, do they contradict each other because each one is untrue, or do they contradict each other because they're each explaining their perspective and their side of the story? In other words, you can have two testimonies of a single event that are contradictory to one another, but they don't contradict the event. Does that make sense? Because they viewed it from their perspective. If there are multiple eyewitnesses who say word for word the exact same testimony, that's where the red flags are going to raise. And so if Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John claim to be eyewitness account or a testimonial to Jesus, and yet they word for word exactly in every incident had the same exact story, especially when it comes to just the works and the stories that took place. When it comes to doctrine, there's 100% agreement in all the manuscripts. You look at all the manuscripts of all the epistles and all the gospels, there's 100% agreement in major Christian doctrine. But when it comes to different events that took place that don't affect doctrine, but historic events, we would expect there to be various perspectives in the eyewitness testimony, giving credence and credit to the historical fact that this incident probably did take place. And it says in Acts, this man bought or purchased a field, which is known today as the field of blood. Well, here's what happened. He takes the money, casts it down at the feet of the people who he was paid by. And they said, according to the other accounts in the eyewitness testimony, one of them said, hey, we can't put this in the treasury. We can't take this back. This isn't our money. This is blood money. So we're not going to receive this. This is his money. So they went out and bought a field in Judas' name because it's still his money. All right, whose money? Who's buying this? Well, it's not the temple, not the Pharisees. We're not buying it. This is Judas' money. We're going to buy it. You can put it in his name. And so they purchased it. So yeah, Judas bought that field. Somebody else bought it on his behalf because they didn't receive it. They didn't run it through their treasury. And so it was still Judas' money. So there's nothing wrong. Peter is not contradicting the other passages when he says this man purchased a field, because this field was purchased with Judas' money. It was Judas's field. That's his legacy. And when you investigate each of the eyewitnesses, even though they do seem to contradict, if you investigate and put the story together, any investigator worth his salt will say, okay, here's what happened. And we're pretty much 100% sure this is what happened. And so I'm thankful that the Bible doesn't give us, every book that is presented as a revelation or a testimony to the revelation of Jesus Christ. I'm thankful that it's not word for word the same testimony concerning the historic events that would have taken place, because you'd have very little trust. You know how easy it would be for critics of the Bible to say, they copied themselves word for word. That's, we got to you would throw that out in a court of law, but they can't do that. So they have to try to make these contradictions appear when they contradict each other as testimonies that they must mean that the event didn't take place. No. Just because an eyewitness or a testimony account contradicts another testimonial account doesn't mean they contradict the event that took place. It doesn't change the fact that this event took place the way it took place. It just means that the testimony, the one who viewed it or the one who heard about it or viewed it from one who was firsthand. And again, the Gospels are written accounts from either eyewitness testimonies or people who were eyewitnesses who gave testimony to somebody else, and it was recorded as an eyewitness account. And so there's very strong evidence of understanding how this event took place, even though the multiple recordings of it, the eyewitness accounts or the testimony of what happened, contradict each other. We know exactly what happened, and Dan is being dishonest.
What this does is this lowers the bar to underground, basically, because it gives you the liberty to imagine and gin up any number of scenarios that you want in order to make those dots connect. And as long as they're not physically impossible, this means it can be Russell's teapot out there in space. As long as it is not physically impossible, then the contradiction has been made to go away.
So again, by modern standards, Dan makes an excellent scholar. He's a great scholar. He's a great academic. But according to judicial standards, he'd be a terrible investigator, an awful detective. It just doesn't work.